As we come on the air, we're seeing more warnings about heavy snow, sleet, ice, flooding, tornadoes even, with a winter storm ripping through the plains and heading to the northeast. And those twisters, possible from Louisiana to Nashville. There's also the chance of damaging winds from Kansas to Michigan. Nearly 100 million of us could see wind up to 65 miles an hour coming up tonight into tomorrow. We've got Bill Cairns tracking this big storm, but we start with Kathy Park in Nashville. Kathy, talk to me about the potential for damage in Nashville, specifically when it comes to tornadoes. I can see and hear that it is raining where you are. It's probably only going to get worse.
Hallie, you're right. I mean, we have been tracking these stormy conditions ever since we woke up this morning. Right now, we're getting hit with these heavy bands of rain as well as strong wind gusts. The last check here in Nashville, some spots reporting 50-mile-per-hour wind gusts, and later on into the evening, 70-mile-per-hour wind gusts not out of the question. But the warning for severe thunderstorms as well as isolated tornadoes, well, that doesn't expire until close to 9 p.m. Eastern, so we have several hours to go. But throughout the day today, these showers led to some flash flooding, especially in the low-lying areas. And because of this severe weather threat, a lot of schools here in Middle Tennessee actually dismissed a lot of their students several hours early just to kind of play it on the safe side. And, of course, officials are urging people who are kind of in this danger zone to make sure your cell phone is charged and make sure you have several ways to get those warnings, Hallie.
What are we seeing in other spots around the country today, Kathy, as you've been monitoring not just what's going down in Tennessee, but throughout the region?
Yeah, so this is just a widespread system. Early on this morning in parts of the Midwest, Kansas City, Missouri, they got slammed with several inches of snow. The morning commute was just a mess. We saw some drivers who were stranded on the roadways. In fact, by midday in Kansas City, Missouri, they broke a snowfall record with almost a half a foot of snow. So they certainly got a lot of snow there. Also in Chicago, they got dumped with heavy rain, which eventually turned into snow. So we're seeing a little bit of everything. And of course, you add in that severe weather threat that we're monitoring right here in Middle Tennessee, Hallie.
Kathy Park, live first there in Nashville. Kathy, stay dry. Thank you for being out there in the elements for us. Bill Cairns is tracking the storm for us. All right, Bill, what are we expecting overnight into tomorrow? Give us the lowdown.
Yeah, this is the peak of the storm, Hallie. This is the most dangerous time as far as severe weather goes. People on the roads driving in ice and snow, and the torrential rain is causing numerous flash flooding problems, especially in western Kentucky and on the rivers because of ice jams. Even northern Ohio is expecting major flooding on a couple of rivers over the next 24 to 48 hours. So it is a mess. The only good news is this is a fast-moving storm. By tomorrow morning, most of it is raced all the way off the East Coast. But the first thing of concern is the tornadoes, of course, and the threat of them. So far, so good. No tornado reports. We have had some wind damage with these thunderstorms in areas of Mississippi. Now the threat is shifting towards Alabama. The tornado watch has been continued through at least 8 p.m. and it looks like a brand new tornado watch has just been issued moments ago near the Birmingham area. That'll probably continue till about 10 p.m. this evening. And then the snow side of the storm. 9 inches of snow in Kansas City today. That was a big deal. That heavy snow now is shifted from St. Louis northwards, especially around Peoria and Chicago. Midway Airport reporting near blizzard conditions right now. This is after heavy rain this morning driving to work. Now you're driving home in 20 degrees, blowing and drifting snow, and it's coming down hard. We've seen numerous reports of cars stranded on highways in Kansas and Missouri, and now Illinois is at risk of that, and then Indianapolis is just a mess too. So how many people are involved in this? Well, the wind alerts are 130 million. That's 1 in 3 Americans. 42 million in the winter weather alerts, and then the flooding alerts is 32 million. That's a whole lot of people. So for the rest of tonight, we're going to watch that severe threat shifting from Mississippi to Alabama and through areas of Tennessee, all the way through Chattanooga. Looks like the storm should weaken by the time they get to Atlanta. And then the heavy rainfall is causing numerous problems. This is going to continue into areas of western New York, northern New England, and Pennsylvania. This is an area that is melting a ton of snow. It was 70 in Washington, D.C. today. Central Park was up into the mid-60s. This warm air is melting the snow, and then we're getting the heavy rain, and that's why we're getting the flash flooding problems. Ice, we're just about done with this. Little additional ice in northern Ohio. And finally, Haley, here's the additional snowfall. Maybe another inch or two in Chicago. But Detroit, you're going to have snow to clean up from later on tonight, also our friends in Buffalo and upstate New York. Haley, I think we mentioned just about every possible type of weather hazard.
I know.
Besides, obviously, a tropical system with this storm. It's ridiculous.
Can you help put us into a little bit of context here, Bill? Because, you know, the catchphrase around these parts with this show is like, it's winter. It snows. These things happen. There is cold weather when it is winter. However, it feels kind of extraordinary that we're seeing, as you say, the variety of precipitation and storm hazards that we're seeing right now. Talk us through that context piece.
I would say we get a storm like this typically March, mid-March, and then into the beginning of April. We get these storms that have these multifacets where you get the severe weather, and on the backside there's still enough cold air left. It's a little unusual to be in the middle of February, and this is primarily a lot of rain and a lot of severe weather with a narrow stripe of snow. So it's early for a storm like this, Hallie, but, you know, this has been a pretty warm winter across the country, so this, you know, shouldn't surprise people that we're getting, you know, March-like weather in February.
Yeah. Bill Cairns, thank you for staying on top of it. Listen, we'll check back in tomorrow morning. We'll see how this system went if people aren't, you know, looking out the window and seeing for themselves. Bill, thank you. Our White House team today reporting that administration officials plan to shift President Biden's economic messaging just a couple of weeks before his State of the Union address. This new, more personal strategy aimed at empathy and aimed at your wallet, right? You are probably paying more for everything. We all are. That's because inflation is at 7.5%. The last time it was this high, Olivia Newton-John had the hit of the summer with physical. It's a long time ago. That's the early 80s. Officials are telling NBC people are not willing to give the president credit for his legislative wins. That's what they think, if they don't think he understands what they're going through financially. And today in Ohio, you had the president testing out the economic pieces of that, pointing to his bipartisan infrastructure law and the economy.
We're rebuilding America. We're going to invest in America and build a better America than we found. But as we rebuild America, we're buying American and betting on American workers.
Joining me now is Josh Letterman outside the White House in Washington. Josh, am I nuts? Did today feel a little bit like a piece of a test run, kind of, for the State of the Union for the president?
Absolutely, Hallie. This is part and parcel with the strategy that the White House has told us that they intend to deploy over the coming weeks in the lead up to the State of the Union. And then, of course, beyond that, as they get towards the midterm elections, with President Biden really tapping into that old political adage that all politics is local. White House officials have been watching the president's dwindling poll numbers as closely as you and I, and they don't feel like the average voter is really connecting in their minds the things that are in this infrastructure law, in all of this massive government spending that President Biden has been able to pass over the last couple of years. The same spending, frankly, that some economists say may be contributing to this inflation problem. But they want to be able to really drive home for people how the specific funding affects their lives directly. And so we saw the president do it today with cleanup of the Great Lakes region, the Midwest, obviously very important politically. But we've also seen the president do it on roads and bridges, on other parts of infrastructure that can be kind of nebulous in concept, but that they hope they will really be able to draw a clear connection to for voters so that hopefully they get some credit when it comes to the elections.
Josh Letterman live for us in Washington outside the White House. Josh, thank you. To Ukraine now and the United Nations, where over the last 72 hours, we've seen this kind of tone shift, right? From really dire to then maybe like the temperature was lowering. Well, not today, with alarms intensifying and this air of certainty, almost reluctant certainty, with the U.S. giving the most forceful signals yet that they believe Vladimir Putin may have made up his mind. Listen to how the president put it when he was on the South Wall with some reporters.
They have not moved any of their troops out. They've moved more troops in. Number one. Number two, we have reason to believe that they are engaged in a false flag operation to have an excuse to go in. My sense this will happen within the next several days.
You heard that from the president there. He says his sense is that he thinks it'll happen within the next several days. That is serious stuff. So is what we heard from Secretary of State Tony Blinken, reminding the Kremlin, like, hey, we're happy to be proven wrong here. Just pull out troops. He right now is on his way to Munich for some more diplomacy, warning the world that Russia might invent a pretext to try and justify war.
I'm mindful that some have called into question our information, recalling previous instances where intelligence ultimately did not bear out. But let me be clear. I am here today not to start a war, but to prevent one.
Here's the thing, that window for diplomacy we talked about, it's still cracked open, but boy, that crack is small, as we keep hearing from experts, especially after today, when we learned that the #2 diplomat in Russia is getting yanked. They're getting kicked out of Russia, basically, which is being seen as this escalation in this whole crisis. And now, some new disturbing videos from Ukraine, the government, of a kindergarten that got shelled in eastern Ukraine. We're about to show it to you. Russian-backed separatists and Ukraine are each pointing fingers at each other for the bombing, which, by the way, thankfully, no kids were hurt, didn't hurt any children. Aaron McLaughlin is in Kyiv. Aaron, let me start there because we're glad to have you live on the ground. And I've been talking to experts and members of Congress all day here about how we should be thinking about this shelling of a kindergarten and what this step means. Talk us through it.
Yeah, well, it was part of a wider escalation of violence that we saw in the Donbass region of eastern Ukraine. Keep in mind, this is a region that has been the subject to an ongoing war for some 8 years now. The OSCE, which is an independent monitoring organization charged with making sure both sides are adhering to a ceasefire, released its report, and its report definitely documented an escalation today in Donetsk with 189 ceasefire violations compared to 24 the previous period, and then in Luhansk with 402 ceasefire violations compared to 129 in the previous period. And while the OSCE at this point is not determining which side escalated the situation, and both the Russian-backed separatists and the Ukrainian government pointing fingers at each other, the kindergarten in particular is the area in which the Ukrainian military released video. What it says is video evidence of a shelling there. And as you noted, thankfully, no children were injured or killed during that attack. But the Ukrainians are pointing to that as a, quote, provocation. That was the words of the Ukrainian president responding to this attack. Now, while the OSCE has not corroborated their version of events, they have not verified. I've made repeated phone calls reaching out to them for their take on the situation. We're waiting on that. Certainly could be seen within the context of an overall escalation and a worrying sign here in Ukraine, Hallie.
Yeah, with some people concerned, some members of the Senate, for example, that this could in fact be the start of a potential false flag operation from Russia to point to what they claim would be a provocation. We talk about troop numbers. We talk about, the warning from President Biden that he believes an invasion could be happening within the next several days, potentially. Are you getting that sense on the ground? Tell me what you're hearing from Ukrainian officials on that front.
Well, Ukrainian government officials have yet to formally react to this latest assessment that we heard from Secretary Blinken earlier today, and then the assessment from the president. We have yet to hear from them formally, but I have been speaking with some Ukrainian military experts who are behind the scenes, part of a think tank that have been analyzing the situation in granular detail. Their assessment of the situation has not changed. They see a high likelihood of some sort of escalation, again, in that eastern Donbass region, the subject of this ongoing separatist war for years, as well as they're extraordinarily concerned with the situation playing out in the Black Sea. Russia has announced that it's having military exercises in the Black Sea until the 19th, cutting off large chunks of the sea for those exercises. And that's problematic because 95% of this country's exports leave through those seaports. So they're concerned, this military expert I've been talking to, about those two areas in particular. He says he believes, in his view, it is less likely an overall invasion, an all-out invasion here in Ukraine, as some of these dire warnings have hinted at, or not hinted at, outright said, coming out of Washington. He sees that as less likely. In his estimation, 150,000 troops would be enough to, say, take a city such as Kyiv, but the Russians' problem is trying to hold any sort of large portion of territory, given the resistance that they would confront from within this country in the event of that full-scale invasion. Hallie.
One through line to this story, Aaron, as I've talked with you and Matt Bradley and Richard Engel and our colleagues who are with you in Ukraine and in the region, has been the dichotomy, the difference between what we hear and the tone in the United States and in the Western world about the threat of war, and then the tone of some, frankly, Ukrainians who have been living under this sort of threat, albeit a less escalated threat, for a number of years, ever since Russia, invaded and took over Crimea. Has that changed at all, Aaron, since you've been on the ground there? Do you feel like in Ukraine there is that same sense of urgency that I think folks in the U.S. and officials in the U.S. feel?
Well, you know, it's interesting. While the Ukrainian government has downplayed this threat, saying that it has different intelligence assessment compared to what we're seeing out of the United States, people in general that I've been talking to here in Kyiv have taken this situation extraordinarily seriously. They're making their preparations. Some families are sending their children to the West. Some are making their own evacuation plans. But at the same time, what you do not see people here doing is panicking. People here are remaining calm. I was just talking about that earlier today to an advisor, a former advisor to President Zelensky. Take a listen to what he had to say.
There's no panic on the ground here, as you can tell, in Kiev, so nobody's, stocking up on toilet paper. The only thing that's in short supply is ammo in the hunting stores, right? So that kind of shows you that Ukrainian people are calm and they're willing to face the threat.
And sort of backing up his assertion there, Hallie, there is a new poll out, which 59% of Ukrainians responded, saying they would be willing to do something physical to defend their country in the event of a Russian invasion. And that is up from 50% the last time that poll was taken in December. So what this shows is that this threat of Russian aggression, these warnings that they're hearing from Washington are serving to galvanize this country, and they say they're ready to defend their homeland. Hallie.
Aaron McLaughlin live for us there in Kyiv. Aaron, thank you. So back to some news here out of the U.S. Former President Trump, his daughter Ivanka Trump, his son Donald Trump Jr. have only 3 weeks until they are going to be compelled to testify under oath unless they appeal. That's after some developing news just late this afternoon that a New York judge has ordered them to answer questions about the Trump Organization's business practices. This is part of the New York Attorney General's civil investigation that alleges the company might have inflated the value of its assets to get basically better loans, better tax benefits. We did hear from a lawyer for Donald Trump Jr. and Ivanka Trump saying there is a likelihood they are going to appeal. So we'll see how this goes. But let me bring in Ken Delaney to break this down now. And Ken, you had heard the arguments today in court. The judge said they were going to make a decision. That is exactly what we saw not even 2 hours ago, that essentially the subpoena that was issued by Letitia James, the New York Attorney General, will have to be complied with by the Trumps. There is a catch, and that's this appeal.
Yeah, there's no way to look at this other than as a resounding defeat for Donald Trump and his children, Hallie, I think. I mean, I listened to most of the arguments today, and the judge seemed somewhat skeptical of the claims by Trump's lawyers that the New York Attorney General was acting improperly by undertaking both civil and criminal investigations into Trump's business dealings. But in his ruling, Judge Arthur Engoron did not mince words. I'll read you the central paragraphs. He said, in the final analysis, a state attorney general commences investigating a business entity, uncovers copious evidence of possible financial fraud, and wants to question, under oath, several of the entity's principals, including its namesake. She has the clear right to do so. Copious, by the way, Hallie, means abundant in supply or quantity, which I thought was an interesting note by the judge there. Trump's lawyers were arguing that the AG should not be able to force him to testify in a civil probe because her office is also participating in a criminal investigation into the same issues being led by the Manhattan District Attorney. They said that requiring Trump's testimony in the civil probe was a way of sidestepping his Fifth Amendment right against self-incrimination. The judge rejected that. He said the target of a hybrid civil criminal investigation cannot use the Fifth Amendment as both a sword and a shield against questions and a sword against the investigation itself, Hallie.
Explain and remind folks, I think, and it's important to do this, as to why this matters. Why does Letitia James want to hear from the Trumps on this, and how might it affect that other criminal investigation being led by the Manhattan DA?
Yeah, well, she wants to ask them very pointed questions about potential misstatements and even fraud, alleged fraud, on their financial statements and how they valued properties and what they said to banks and insurance companies. And it's relevant because, we're seeing, for example, the House Oversight Committee now wants to cancel Donald Trump's lease on the Trump Hotel with the old federal post office. And they say, hey, we've looked at his financial statements and we think they are misleading and contain material misstatements, which is sort of accounting speak for fraud. And so these allegations are piling up, Hallie, that Donald Trump was not operating on the level in his business practices. And the idea that he's going to go and testify and answer questions about that in a civil case, to me, seems rather remote. I mean, I think it's almost certain he will claim the Fifth Amendment, as his son Eric did more than 500 times, and then we're going to see what happens with the criminal case.
It's really important you bring that up because, first of all, correct me if I'm wrong, what he says in this deposition in this civil case could be used in the criminal investigation, correct?
Absolutely, it could be used,
okay.
and that's why he's unlikely to answer the questions, and by not answering, that can be viewed as a negative inference in the civil case. But a civil case is about money, Hallie. Criminal case is about trying to send these people to jail, and so I think that's where the priority lies in terms of the Trump defense. Ken
Delanian breaking it all down for us. A lot of threads coming in on this late in the day, Ken, so thank you for pulling that all together for us. I appreciate it. Today, friends and family said their final goodbyes to Amir, the 22-year-old who was shot and killed by Minneapolis police during a no-knock raid earlier this month. Reverend Al Sharpton led the service and delivered the eulogy, while both of Locke's parents called for justice for their son. Police apparently were looking for a suspect connected to a homicide when they raided the apartment Locke was in. He was not named, by the way, in that no-knock warrant. Body cam video of the shooting had been released, and we want to warn you, it's hard to watch. Police walk in the apartment. Locke seems to be sleeping on a couch. He gets up. He's holding a gun, which his family says he legally owned. He was allowed to have, they say. Police then opened fire. Locke's family calls what happened. You see that video here. They call what happened an execution. Minneapolis's mayor has put a pause on some no-knock warrants while the city looks at its policies on this. And the State Bureau of Criminal Apprehension is investigating the shooting overall. Ron Allen is in Minneapolis tonight. And Ron, this afternoon we heard from Amir Locke's father, who says he can hardly sleep, he can hardly eat, knowing what happened to his son.
He's shaken. He says he is physically keeps shaking because of the horror of what they're going through. Locke's mother, too, obviously very, very upset. He was 22 years old. He had his whole life ahead of him. He was a delivery man for DoorDash, and he was planning to move to Dallas to be with his mother to try to begin a career in the music business. He had his whole life ahead of him. There's a lot of things that go into this case that deal with the police department and other issues, but ultimately this is a family that's lost their son. And here's some of what the parents had to say at the service this morning. Take a listen.
Those thugs that represent the Minneapolis Police Department executed my baby boy, beautiful baby boy, in less than 9 seconds.
America, hear us clearly. Justice for Amir Locke. Justice for Amir Locke. And we're passing that no-knock warrant bill. We'll pass in this name, and it's going to save millions of lives.
That's the mission that the family and Locke's supporters are on, is to try and pass a bill in the Minnesota legislature and here in the city of Minneapolis itself to try and stop police from using no-knock warrants. Now, there's a lot of pushback to that from the law enforcement community, who insist that these warrants are necessary to give them the element of surprise when they're dealing with very dangerous and violent suspects. So that's their mission. And also at the federal level, there's a push by Representative Ilhan Omar here from this part of the country to try and get federal legislation in this area.
Yeah.
But it's going to be something of an uphill battle, but it's what they feel it's their mission, and that's what they're trying to do.
Tell me more about where those state and federal pushes will go, Ron, because it's really important, I think, for us. Amir Locke made headlines when this happened, right? What happened to him was everywhere. Staying on top of that story is important, right? And there are people in his city, in his community, around the country who are continuing to fight for justice in his name. But as you point out, that may not be as easy as a snap of the fingers when it comes to these no-knock warrants.
Ben Crump, who's an attorney in so many of these cases, made the point that 80% of these no-knock warrants happen in black neighborhoods, black communities. He insists. I'm not sure what the citing is, but that's the point of view that people here have about these warrants, that they're not used in a just way, in a fair way. And it's another example, they would argue, about how the criminal justice system treats people of color differently, harshly, unfairly, and that this is the result. Remember, this echoes the case of Breonna Taylor in Louisville, Kentucky. She was asleep with her boyfriend when police stormed in, and there was a no-knock warrant that they were using in that case. And now, years later, no police officer in that case has been charged in connection with her death. There's an officer who's facing charges in connection with allegedly firing wildly into another apartment and putting those people at risk. So that gives you a sense of how difficult it may be. Law enforcement, again, insists that these warrants are necessary when they're dealing with violent criminals. In this case, as you pointed out, Locke had a weapon, but the family insists that it was a licensed weapon that he kept because he was a delivery man and he was concerned about crime. And he was concerned about crime because he was leaving here. And the police say that that weapon justifies what happened, essentially, although they're investigating it. But that's what they say. That's what they had said as to why they responded as they did, because he was armed.
Let's get you over to the 5 things our team thinks you should know about tonight. Number 1, beaches in Sydney, over in Australia, are reopening Friday after the city's first deadly shark attack in almost 60 years. A 35-year-old swimmer died in that attack on Wednesday. Officials are still looking for what they think was the great white shark they believe killed him. Number 2, an activist in Kentucky charged with attempted murder after allegedly shooting at a Louisville mayoral candidate has been released from jail. Quintez Brown is now on home incarceration after the Louisville Community Bail Fund posted his $100,000 bond. Brown allegedly opened fire at Craig Greenberg in his campaign office. Greenberg was not hurt. Brown's attorney told a local newspaper his client is mentally ill. Number 3, a jury in Texas found former LA Angels employee Eric Kay guilty today in Tyler Skaggs' overdose death. Skaggs was a pitcher for the team and died in 2019. Prosecutors said Kay provided Skaggs with the drugs that killed him. Number 4, the Department of Education is forgiving student loans for about 16,000 people who attended schools that were for-profit. About $415 million is going to be ended up canceled. More than $70 million will go to students who say they were defrauded by DeVry University. The Education Department found the university lied about the success of its graduates to get people to enroll. Number 5, if you ever wished you lived in a Disney park, you almost can. Walt Disney, the company, says it's building a series of planned communities called Story Living by Disney. Look at some of these renderings. The first one's going to be built in California near Palm Springs. Tesla CEO Elon Musk says the SEC is harassing him, trying to chill his right to free speech. Those claims come in at a time when the company is facing another investigation, this time over some cars braking while heading down the highway. We're going to get into that a little bit later, but first, NBC News covers hundreds of stories every day. And because you couldn't possibly read or watch or listen to them all, our bureau teams have done it for you. This is what they tell us is going down in their regions in a segment we call The Local. From our Southeast Bureau, Republicans in Florida's House of Representatives have approved a ban on most abortions after 15 weeks. Overnight, it makes no exceptions for rape or incest. The bill now goes to the GOP-controlled state Senate. Our West Coast Bureau reporting a story out of Nevada being called a miracle. A 64-year-old woman was reported missing Monday morning. And you know where a search party found her hours later? Clinging to a tree on this big slope. She was hundreds of feet from the road. One of the officials said the woman had signs of hypothermia, but luckily she's expected to make a full recovery. And out of our Northeast Bureau, New Yorkers are known to have a don't shoot the messenger. Some New Yorkers have an attitude. It's just a thing. That's like a point of pride, right? That could be cool, but it's less cool if you're an Uber passenger. The company surveyed drivers and they said New York City riders were the worst. Sorry, New York. Passengers in Seattle and Boston also got dinged for not being nice, and in D.C. too, I hate to say it. The best passengers? Apparently you folks out in San Antonio, Texas. Congratulations. We want to bring you now today's original with in-depth reporting on a topic we've been keeping an eye on. An Indiana school counselor tonight is getting some criticism online after a memo he sent to parents letting them opt their kids out of Black History Month lessons. That memo was posted to Twitter. Just the latest in kind of that social media firestorm over what's appropriate when teaching race in schools. You've got some teachers who say they're thinking about quitting because their states are restricting what they can teach, too. Our Mora Barrett has more on this one for us tonight.
Outrage over a teacher in Massachusetts making toddlers wear blackface masks. And parents in Indiana upset after they say a teacher had students draw black people picking cotton.
Picking cotton was forced labor. It's not something it's not a part of our heritage. There's so many other things that could have been discussed. Inventors, business owners.
Just a few instances of questionable choices on how to teach about Black History Month in schools.
Racism has gone on far too long. We know it's not going to go anywhere. It does not belong in Lawrence Township schools or any school district.
In Massachusetts, the teacher was fired, and the school district in Indiana says the assignment demonstrates poor judgment. While these two states don't have rules on how race and its history in the U.S. can be taught, in the last year, 37 states have introduced measures to limit how race and discrimination can be taught in public schools. 14 states have imposed laws or rules to enforce those restrictions.
It's just demoralizing. I don't feel trusted. I don't feel like they respect the profession.
Like in Iowa, where Tyler Stewart teaches middle school history and government. The state's law limits how teachers can discuss race and gender in the classroom, and conservative lawmakers also recently introduced bills that would require cameras to be installed in classrooms and state control over social studies lesson plans. Because of this, Stewart decided he won't be teaching in Iowa next year.
The constant attacks and the misinformation campaign around COVID, and then when they started trickling in the critical race theory stuff and cameras, like everything kind of started to pile on. And then it just kind of hit me as I don't have to keep doing this. I don't. Honestly, I could go somewhere else and make more money and not have to worry about being the center of an attack by our government and by our governor.
Scholars, who believe learning accurate history informs our present and future, see these limitations as suppression.
What that does is it tells us that there's only one way to be a citizen in this country. There's only one truth.
For the future education and the future of the country and like students that are going to grow up and be part of society, what implications do you see in this for the future of these students?
I think we are going to see a more hyper-visible resurgence, even if it's slow, of the things that we're saying we shouldn't teach about, like racism. What policies like this does is it emboldens people to sort of continue or sort of ratchet up, if you will, further instances of racism and sort of repression, because it's like, well, we can't talk about it, right? But that doesn't mean that it can't happen.
Mora Barrett is joining us now. Mora, it's great to have you with us on your reporting. Talk to me about what you're hearing on the concerns, moving forward now, of what happens if you've got these different states teaching kids different versions related to Black History Month.
Well, it's a little like what you just heard from Professor Coles there, right? He's concerned about the extent at which history ultimately repeats itself and how racism exists in America. He teaches at UMass Amherst, and he told me about an incident just this past fall where an anonymous white student group formed and sent out emails, anti-Black rhetoric emails to Black student groups on campus, telling them that they didn't deserve to be there, that they were only there because of affirmative action. And those are college students, educated college students, right? Meanwhile, you're looking at Tyler, who's teaching middle school students in Iowa who are absorbing all of what's going on around them as they're growing up with their impressionable minds, as they're going on into later education. And even then, he's hearing students drop the N-word without recognizing its severity. And so it's examples like that why he thinks this oversight that they're seeing about what they can and can't teach in the classroom and seeing politics being brought into the classroom this way just isn't right when he sees that these human rights issues are not neutral opinions, and that students need to be able to understand the history and the background as they go on throughout their lives, and that's not what they're able to do right now in some of these states, Hallie.
Mora, great to see you tonight. Thank you for bringing us that. Appreciate it. Coming up next, Tesla facing another investigation, this time over something called phantom braking. So what is that? We'll explain in a minute. Tesla under investigation from the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration over complaints of what's called phantom braking. That's basically when a car suddenly stops on the road for no apparent reason when the autopilot is on. Sounds kind of scary. No, the agency says it's gotten something like 350 complaints about this. It's specifically looking into the Tesla Model 3 and Model Y from this year and last year, more than 400,000 cars, vehicles, if you will, in total. These reports of phantom braking first started popping up last fall when Tesla had to roll back a new version of its driver assistance software because of safety issues. So far, fortunately, nobody's been hurt. There have been no crashes because of this braking thing. We've reached out to the company for comment. We have not heard back. CNBC's Phil LeBeau joins me now to talk about all this and a whole lot more. Phil, I'm so glad to have you on. You know this industry so well. Talk to me about this investigation and talk to me about this phenomenon of phantom braking. It feels, describing it, like it could be pretty terrifying if you're in the driver's seat when it happens.
Sure. Imagine going along on the highway and all of a sudden your car starts to brake and you're not touching the brake pedal. It could be very scary depending on exactly what happens with the traffic around you. This is the beginning of an investigation, Hallie, and ultimately what will be determined by the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration, is there a defect? And if there is, should Tesla have to initiate a recall? Keep in mind, however, there are thousands of investigations of potential flaws in vehicles, and they never end in a recall because they ultimately determine that there's not a defect. So it's very early on in this case.
Talk to me about Tesla overall, because we've talked about it here on this show. They're getting some attention from the federal government lately. 10 voluntary recalls in the past 4 months in the U.S.
Yep.
Is there a damage control factor here for the company?
Well, you would think that this would hurt the brand, but take a guess at who's had the best sales in terms of growth in the last percentage-wise in the last year. It's Tesla. They are the Kleenex brand of electric vehicles. When you say, I'm interested in an electric vehicle to somebody, they say, are you buying a Tesla? They never say, are you buying a particular brand? They say, are you buying a Tesla? It's still king of the hill when it comes to EVs.
And the king of the Tesla hill, of course, is Elon Musk, right, the company CEO. He's now got this, I don't know if you'd call it a spat, Phil, what you'd call it, but he's saying that the SEC is chilling his right to free speech. It's this letter to a federal judge. It has to do with this agreement from 2018 that settled. Listen, it is some weedsy stuff here, but basically saying that, you know, this SEC alleged that Musk uses social media to make these misleading statements, et cetera. What is the issue? What is the problem? Explain it to me here.
Comes back to the agreement that the SEC and Musk reached in 2018. In that consent decree, according to Musk's attorney, the SEC is supposed to go to the judge if they have a concern about his communications, whether it's on Twitter, whatever social media platform it might be. Their attorneys believe that the SEC is harassing him because they're not going to the judge. They're just filing subpoenas to Tesla and to Musk. And they're saying, hey, this violates his free speech. Hallie, this has been going on since 2018. I think it'll be going on for quite a while.
I back you up on that prediction. Phil LeBeau, it's so great to have you. Thank you for breaking that all down and making it really easy to understand.
You bet.
Appreciate it. Appreciate you, too, all of you, for watching. That's it for this hour of the show. Flew, right? We're going to have more for you here tomorrow. Same time, same place. Have a great Thursday night. Coverage picks up right now.
Thanks for watching our YouTube channel. Follow today's top stories and breaking news by downloading the NBC News app.